Hey there, and welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take these stories that everyone's buzzing about, and we really get into it.
We dive deep.
We dive deep.
That's why they call it that.
That's why they call it that. And today, well, let's just say today's deep dive is about as relevant as it gets, especially with the election heating up.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny how these seemingly small stories, they can act as like a crack, and you peek through that crack and you see this whole other layer of stuff going on beneath the surface.
Okay, I like that analogy. And the crack we're talking about today is, well, it involved former President Trump, 60 Minutes, and a whole lot of questions about how we consume political news.
And canceled interviews.
And canceled interviews. So for those of you who haven't heard, former President Trump backed out of that traditional pre-election interview with 60 Minutes, the one, it's like a rite of passage for presidential hopefuls.
It really is. It's been the standard for decades. I mean, for over half a century, 60 Minutes has been the go-to for these kind of hard-hitting political interviews.
Exactly. So naturally, when news broke that Trump wouldn't be in that hot seat, well, people started talking. And thankfully, you guys sent in this CBS News article that breaks it all down.
Which is a good thing, because we need as much context as possible here. Because at first glance, you see canceled interview, and you might think, okay, scheduling conflict happens. But it's so much more than that.
Right. So according to the CBS article, it all started with a back and forth about locations. Trump's team initially agreeing to both Mar-a-Lago and a Pennsylvania venue.
Which, at first glance, seems pretty accommodating, right? Like, they're offering options.
Right. It's like, take your pick. And it gets even more interesting. The article actually includes this quote from a text message sent by Trump's communication director confirming the agreement. The text literally says the president said yes.
So then, boom, cancellation. Which obviously makes you wonder, okay, if it wasn't the location, what was it?
And that's where things get really interesting. The article highlights how the Trump campaign took issue with 60 Minutes fact-checking policies.
Which, in and of itself, opens up a whole can of worms about, the role of fact-checking in journalism, the relationship between politicians and the media.
And even how we, as consumers of news, should be approaching all of this.
Yeah.
It's like, whose responsibility is it to sort truth from, well, everything else?
It's a great question, and it's one we're grappling with more and more these days. Because it's not just about this one interview, right? It speaks to a larger trend of, I don't know, maybe mistrust. Or maybe it's about control over the narrative, who gets to decide what's true.
And that's a really important point to bring up.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just about the fact-checking itself. The Trump campaign actually demanded an apology from Lesley Stahl, one of the most respected journalists on 60 Minutes, based on something she supposedly said during their 2020 interview.
Which, as I'm sure many of you remember, that 2020 interview was, well, let's just say it was explosive. Trump ended up walking out of that one, too.
He did. So clearly there's a history here.
Yeah.
But this time, even Vice President Harris weighed in, and she didn't hold back. The article quotes her suggesting that if people really want to understand Trump, they should tune into his rallies.
Which is a very pointed statement, right?
Yeah.
Because she's highlighting the stark contrast between those rallies, which are known for being, let's just say, less structured.
Less filtered.
Yeah, less filtered is a good way to put it. And that's compared to this traditional interview setting, where there's potential for tough questions, for fact-checking, for follow-ups that maybe he doesn't want to address.
So essentially she's saying, if you want the unvarnished version, go straight to the source. Which again brings us back to this question of, how do we navigate truth in a world where we're constantly bombarded with information from all sides?
Exactly. It's like we have to become our own media critics, our own fact-checkers.
And I think that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. This wasn't just about a canceled interview. It was a glimpse into the much larger, much more complicated relationship between politics, the media, and, honestly, our own responsibility to be informed citizens.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This whole 60 Minutes situation, it's a reminder that we can't just passively absorb what we see and hear, whether it's on TV, online, or even, whispered around the water cooler.
We have to engage with information actively, think critically about it, consider the source and any potential biases.
Absolutely. Because in the end, an informed public is crucial for a functioning democracy. So do your homework, folks.
That's right. And on that note, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this whole situation? Was canceling this interview justified? Is fact-checking really the issue here? Head over to our social media and tell us what you think. Let's keep this deep dive conversation going because, honestly, we learn just as much from you as you do from us.
That's a fact.
Until next time, happy diving.